Welcome to Bible study today. Title of our lesson is Mercy. The dictionary definition to mercy is kindness or forgiveness shown especially to somebody a person has power over. The gospel continues to be offered to all people, Jews and Gentiles. When was the first time you felt like you were on the outside looking in? What emotions does that stir up in your heart and mind? I'm sure that we've all experienced that one time or another. Romans 9:11 consists of an appendix that focuses on the role of Jews under the new covenant based on faith. Many Jews fail to see Jesus as a Messiah. Nevertheless, Paul believed that God had not given up on them. Paul believed that a remnant of the faithful Israelites would embrace grace, and in time God's work among the Gentiles would convince Israel to come back to God on his terms, not on their own. Normally, a farmer would grow some cultivated olive branches to graft onto a wild tree. Paul reversed the order by grafting wild branches into the trunk of an olive tree. In Romans 11:13, Paul says, "Now I am speaking to you Gentiles, insofar as I am an apostle to the Gentiles. I magnify my ministry." In Romans 11, starting in verse 17, it says, "Now some of the branches were broken off, and you, though a wild olive branch, were grafted in among them, and have come to share in the rich root of the cultivated olive tree. Do not boast that you are better than those branches, but if you do boast, you do not sustain the root, but the root sustains you. Then you will say, branches are broken off so that I might be grafted in. True enough, they were broken off because of unbelief, but you stand by faith. Do not be arrogant, but beware, because if God did not spare the natural branches, he will not spare you either." Well, here Paul has used the analogy of Gentiles being wild olive branches and the Jews being the broken branches of a tame olive tree, and the wild branches being grafted into the tame tree, whose root is God, and the branches being the children of God, with the wild branches or Gentiles being adopted into the family of God. Why was it important for Paul to remind the Gentile believers to refrain from boasting about their salvation? Well, in verse 21, it says, "Because if God did not spare the natural branches, he will not spare you either." Paul's giving them a stern warning. Paul was reminding the Gentiles that their salvation was all about God's grace and not about anything they had accomplished or contributed. The Gentiles should express gratitude instead of pride. As I read Romans 11:22 through 24, I'd like to invite you to imagine a balance scale weighing two attributes of God. For clarification, what is a balance scale and how does it work? Well, the two plates or bowls are suspended at equal distances from a pivot point. One plate holds an object of unknown weight, while the known objects are added to another plate until the plates level off, which happens when the weights of the two plates are equal. Romans 11:22 through 24. Therefore, consider God's kindness and severity. Severity towards those who have fallen, but God's kindness towards you if you remain in his kindness. Otherwise, you too will be cut off. And even they, if they do not remain in unbelief, will be grafted in, because God has the power to graft them in again. For if you were cut off from your native wild olive tree, and against nature were grafted into a cultivated olive tree, how much more will these, the natural branches, be grafted into their own tree? Here, Paul challenged the Gentiles to examine God's perfect balance between kindness and severity. How would we describe this balance between God's severity and his kindness? Well, God is not so kind that he overlooks evil, and he's not so harsh that he condemns without cause. Instead, he shows a stern but righteous attitude towards those who have fallen. He loves all, but those who rejected his offer of salvation will face the consequences of their decision. Paul believed Israel's rejection of the gospel was not final. In Romans 11:25 through 29, notice that the roles the Jews and Gentiles played in demonstrating that all people have an opportunity to receive God's salvation. I don't want you to be ignorant of this mystery, brothers and sisters, so that you will not be conceited. A partial hardening has come upon Israel until the fullness of the Gentiles has come in. And in this way, all of Israel will be saved, as it is written. The deliverer will come from Zion. He will turn godliness away from Jacob. And this will be my covenant with them when I take away their sins. Regarding the gospel, they are enemies for your advantage. But regarding election, they are loved because of the patriarchs, since God's gracious gifts and calling are irrevocable. God's plan's always been based on faith. Since God has all authority, he can graft anyone who expresses faith. God's done it for the Gentiles, he will do it for the Jews. If they would overcome their lack of faith, Paul believed that day was coming. He illustrated his belief by quoting the prophecy of Isaiah in verse 26, and further explained in verses 28 and 29 how God would bring these things together for the good of his glory. In Romans 11:30 through 32, I'd like for you to listen for each time Paul used the word mercy. As you once disobeyed God, but now have received mercy through their disobedience, so they too have now disobeyed, resulting in mercy to you, so that they may also receive mercy. For God has imprisoned all in disobedience, so that he may have mercy on all. As you remember, the basic dictionary definition of mercy is kindness or forgiveness shown especially to somebody a person has power over. Today's key doctrine is God's purpose of grace. Election is a glorious display of God's sovereign goodness and is infinitely wise, holy, and unchangeable. It excludes boasting and promotes humility. To further back this up, go to Philippians 2. Note that God's promises cannot be changed or altered. He's committed to following through his restoration of the world through his grace and mercy. In summary of today's lesson, number one, because salvation comes through faith in Jesus alone, there's no room for arrogance expressed towards unbelievers. Number two, all believers need to be aware that God's mercy demonstrated in Christ remains open to the Jews. Number three, God is merciful to everyone, giving salvation to all who place their faith in his Son. Here's some questions I'd like you all to reflect on. What makes religious pride so crippling and dangerous? And how would you rate your awareness of God's offer of salvation made to all people? I'd like to quote the verses of How Deep the Father's Love for Us by Stuart Townend. I think it's very appropriate for today's lesson. How deep the Father's love for us, how vast beyond all measure, that he should give his only Son to make a wretch his treasure. How great the pain of searing loss, the Father turns his face away, as wounds which mar the chosen one bring many sons to glory. Behold the man upon a cross, my sin upon his shoulders. Ashamed I hear my mocking voice call out among the scoffers. It was my sin that heft him there until it was accomplished. His dying breath has brought me life. I know that it is finished. I will not boast in anything, no gifts, no power, no wisdom, but I will boast in Jesus Christ, his death and resurrection. Why should I gain from his reward? I cannot give an answer, but this I would with all my heart: his wounds have paid my ransom. If you'd like to hear the song, which I would suggest, you can go to it on YouTube. I'll try to leave a link below. If I can't, just search for Stuart Townsend on how deep the Father's love is for us, and you'll find it. Thank you, and thank you for listening. God bless you all, and have a good week.